What do you
Well,
think, Gail?
I think we can start. So let me give a brief introduction to Bev as a board member and co-chair of the Exhibit and Collections Committee of the African American Historical and Culture Museum of Washtenaw County. She's also the administrator for the Washtenaw County Historical Society and serves on the board of the Ann Arbor Historical Foundation. So we're really delighted to have you with us and share some local history.
Great. Well, thank you for the lovely introduction. I am so happy to be here to spend this few minutes on this beautiful Sunday morning. It's bright, it's sunny, it's Valentine's Day. It's a special day to celebrate love and tell all of those that we care about just what they mean to us, how much they mean to us. And I want you to know today that how much I appreciate being able to spend this time with you and share some love for our common roots. Now, we just have a few minutes of time. So along this way, you might see a few sites that are part of the Underground Railroad tour of Washtenaw County and some other places that have a deep connection to African American community history that you drive by or walk by every day. Church history, a community history, deals with things that are most tender and sacred. It deals with life's high and somber hours are recalled, the joyous wedding services, the sweet hopes of our baptisms, and the solemn majesties of the deaths that we mourn and we mark. It also marks the changes of social customs and theological beliefs. Our churches bear witness to the timeless things of the human spirit. Hallowed ground is often where something unique or profound is to have happened. Churches, synagogues, mosques, temples, all places of worship can be viewed as hallowed ground. No blood needs to be spilled, but it often is. Now, local history often brings a national or international story into perspective. And when you stand in places where people have lived or worked over 100 years ago, we are allowed to experience what we can no longer see. Now we know part of that history happened because there were people from different places who settled a county in a territory that was already inhabited by Native Americans. Part of that history happened because there were free people of color living in Michigan from the day Detroit was settled in 1701 by French colonists and the Africans who arrived with them. James Array was a free Black man who bought land and settled his family in Pittsfield Township in 1826. Reverend Brooks was the first pastor of the Union Church, arrived here in 1826 after purchasing his freedom. He also bought land in Pittsfield Township. He farmed, and then he returned to Ann Arbor to lead a congregation of African American worshipers at Elizabeth and High Street in a small frame cottage. Two of our largest, and that house is still standing. Two of our largest and oldest local Black churches grew from that first church, Bethel African Methodist Episcopal and Second Baptist. There were also African Americans who moved through this area via the Underground Railroad en route to Canada, where freedom was assured and their safety was very much guaranteed. Now, one of the sites that's on and this of course is your beautiful church standing here at the corner of State and Williams, surrounded by everything that is new, but encompassed by everything that is old and sacred. And this is a picture of your church from the 1870s, the statue of Ben Franklin across the street. I forget what that building is right there on the left, but of course there's your church on the right. And the reason why your church has a significant part of history with our Underground Railroad tour is because the First Presbyterian Church in Ann Arbor on November 10th, 1836, now the credit union stands in its place, was where the first meeting of the Michigan Anti-Slavery Society was held. Now, you know, your church was organized and established in 1847 by 48 members of the Presbyterian Church who had roots in Congregationalism. They were dissatisfied with the Presbyterian form of government, disagreed with the Presbyterian minister, who was also a Southerner, who was not able to renounce slavery. My family roots are in Alabama, Tennessee, North Carolina, where my family lives today. So I truly understand the paradox that this posed. The cornerstone for your current church was laid in 1872, and in 1876, the present building was dedicated. And this church is still considered to be one of the most beautiful in Ann Arbor. There's a plaque at the credit union that talks about the founding meeting of the Michigan Anti-Slavery Society. And when you're downtown, taking a walk through, looking at some of those wonderful downtown street exhibit signs, take a few minutes to walk by and read this. Now, at the time, State Street was still a dirt road. The university was across the street. The neighborhood was mainly residential. A lot of the parishioners walked to your services. I'm sorry, I just thought I heard somebody in the background over here.
No, I think if everybody could mute, that would be great. I can't mute you because it won't let me co-host with you.
Oh, okay,
It took away my ability to mute. But if everybody could mute themselves until time for questions, that would be great, so we don't miss anything that Ms. Willis is saying.
I appreciate that so much. Now, for most of the 20th century, the 100 block of East Ann Street was a hub for Black-owned businesses in downtown Ann Arbor. There was a rotating set of barbershops, shoeshine parlors, dry cleaners, restaurants, all kinds of businesses that formed the backbone of Black social life. The district stretched around the corner onto North 4th Avenue, where the Colored Welfare League housed Black-owned businesses and community organizations, such as the early Dunbar Center. Now, these two pictures are of 115 and 117 Ann Street as it looks today. This is how it looked in the 1890s at 115 Ann Street. This is the interior view of Papa John Easley's barbershop. And he's standing there with the shears cutting the head of a customer. And it was not unusual for female barbers to also work in the shops because they often had beauty salons where they took care of the women customers. This is the shop next door of Barber Wade Robbins, ready to receive customers and take care of business on Ann Street. And this is a photograph of the block of the picture of the building. And at the far left end, on the corner, is the old post office. And there was a barber shop that was located in that post office called MC Shoecraft. An 1879 Michigan Argus article described his employees as 6 colored knights of the strop who wield the razor and the shears. His shop was located on the 2nd floor of this ornate Beale block at the corner of Main and East Ann Street. The Beale block also housed the Ann Arbor Post Office. Another early hub, and this is a photograph of the Ann Street today with a mural that curves around to face it that was painted by community high students in 2015. And this mural depicts some of the African-American people, places, and stories from this community. Reverend Carpenter, the Reverend from Second Baptist Church, is on the left. Next to him, Mayor Wheeler, followed around the corner by community activist, Bethel AME Church. This right here, on the right, which is probably blocked by some of the names, our picture panel, was where the Colored Welfare League was. The building that says Cigars Ice Cream was a building where abolitionist meetings were held on the 2nd floor. And the other building is Ann Street block, where the Black businesses were located.
Mhm.
And this is it today. What's missing, of course, is that building right there. But the Colored Welfare League stands on the right, and Street Block stands on the left, and it is Carytown neighborhood. So by World War I, and the one thing about this building, the Colored Welfare League building, which is where the Birkenstock store is on 4th Avenue, was it was originally the Kaiser Block. It was built in 1899, and after a brief stint as the Newman Hotel, which came under African American ownership. And the most famous of these owners was the heavyweight champion Hank Griffin, who opened it as the Griffin Hotel in Ann Arbor in 1907, as well as it housed a local boxing gym. By World War I, the African American community in Ann Arbor was growing, and it was becoming difficult for newcomers and migrant workers to find housing. Community leaders used leftover funds from the money that was raised to have send-off parties for Black World War I soldiers. They used that money as a down payment to purchase the Kaiser Block. And they purchased it and they opened the Colored Welfare League in 1921. So the league rented out rooms to boarders and storefronts to businesses such as Sam Elliott's Barbershop, James A. Moore's Restaurant, and it also became an important home for community organizations like the Dunbar Center. Now, the Ann Arbor Community Center started in 1923, originally called the Dunbar Center after the African-American poet Paul Laurence Dunbar. It was started by Reverend Gilbert, a young minister at Second Baptist Church of Ann Arbor. He asked the community for help to rejuvenate the old building. Purpose of it was to accommodate housing for African-American men who came to work on roads and university buildings in Ann Arbor, but had no place to stay. So in 1926, the center had moved to Catherine Street, but in 1937, they arranged for the purchase at 420 North 4th Avenue. Now, during the 40s and the 50s, the center continued to provide civic and cultural and recreational activities for the Black community. It was very, very instrumental. The picture on the right is a picture of what they called story time at the Dunbar Community Center with Miss Ada B. Hill, October 25th, 1958. Now, Miss Ada was a graduate of EMU. She taught school at Ypsilanti for a number of years. In addition to her 23 years of volunteering at the Dunbar Community Center, she taught Sunday school at the First Congregational Church for 30 years. Now, Miss Hill volunteered her services in tribute to her grandfather, Eli Benton, one of the organizers and supporters of the Underground Railroad in this area. She actually believed that many of her pupils were descendants of the freedmen who stayed in the Ann Arbor area after coming north on the Underground Railroad. She noted that Dunbar does not practice segregation and that children who attend her story hours every Wednesday come from many ethnic groups in the community. Dunbar is an important integrating influence in Ann Arbor, she said. Since the center opened, the color line has faded tremendously. She trekked to Dunbar Center every Wednesday, year in and year out, to tell stories and organize games for children of 5 to 7 years old. She would compose and tell stories from nature and from history and from her life experience, because she had a strong belief that you got education through these stories. Her stories were designed to teach honesty and all good things in life, and that all of the treats and things that she did for the kids, she pays for out of her own pocket. Douglas Williams, who was the leader of the center at that time, said that Miss Hill had been very instrumental in the success of that program for the past 23 years. Now, the picture on the left was from 1951 of these children that was taken as a publicity photo for a community chess campaign. as community of Ann Arbor was always very supportive of the Ann Arbor Community Center. This picture, I'm working with a project at the University of Michigan, Bentley Library, to help identify houses where Black students lived on their early days on campus. And we have a list of 40 houses. And this is one of the houses that's on that list. One of the highest number of Black students that came and lived and boarded at the university stayed at this house at 5th and East Kingsley, I believe it is, right across the street from Carytown. Now this house is on North State Street, 410 to be exact. An 1851 deed confirms that Richard Glazier and his brother Robert, who were trustees of the Society of Friends, Quakers, purchased this property on behalf of the society for a meeting house. It was the only house at the time on this stretch of State Street. Now, Robert was an active Quaker and one of the conductors on the Underground Railroad. His home was a station. It is believed that his home was a station on the system, on part of the 300 acres that he owned on the northeast side of Ann Arbor. Glazier Way is named for him. The house is no longer standing, but research has shown that that was a place of shelter. Judge Noah Cheever, who wrote Stories and Amazing Incidents in the Early History of University of Michigan, Ann Arbor, wrote about the winter of 1860 to 1861 when Parker Pillsbury, an abolitionist, came to Ann Arbor to speak. He appointed a meeting in the old Free Church on the east-north side of North State Street, near the brow of the hill, now a dwelling house. This house has had a strong association with abolition in its earliest years. And in fact, Bethel AME church history says that sometime before 1865, their congregation shared worship space with the Quakers at this house at State and Lawrence. And it was a natural pairing, of course, because the local Quakers had always been helpful on the Underground Railroad. And this is the church, 504 High Street, as it looks today, the Union Church. Small brick structure that appeared on the 1854 map of Ann Arbor, labeled simply as the Union Church. It apparently was not finished until 1857 because that's when the Michigan Argus on December 25th reported, the Union Church has been completed by the colored people of the city and is to be dedicated on Sunday by Reverend J.M. Gregory. It continued to be used as a church into the 1870s, but by 1871, it had already become too large and had split into two congregations, Second Baptist Church and Bethel AME Church. And this is a picture of Bethel AME Church on North 4th Avenue. It's the Sunday school in 1930. Now that building is currently used as condominiums. And that's a picture of Bethel AME Church on the right. And on the left when it was used as a church for New Grace. So it had a second church home before it was converted into the condominiums. And this is Second Baptist Church at Beeks and North 5th. On the left is the first church. It was torn down and a second structure was built on the same location. It was torn down and then the location that is on the right was built. And this is a picture of what they would call the Harvest Festival at Second Baptist Church. And the Harvest Festival was the outstanding affair for the year. It was observed on the second Sunday of October. The church was beautifully decorated with the fruits and vegetables gathered by the pastor and his committee. And on this occasion, each member was asked to contribute just $1. A host of distinguished educators and outstanding speakers was always asked to participate. Second Baptist and Bethel AME Church have a very important foundational root in our history. Now, I come back to this picture of George Jewett and your church as it was in 1872. Now, what's significant about George Jewett, Ann Arbor's son, beautiful man, his descendants are with us today. Many of you may have known Coleman Jewett or have listened to WEMU, Michael Jewett's radio station. This is the family. The father of George Jewett, George Jewett Sr., was part of the African-American migration to the Midwest during the decades after the Civil War. Although racism was less violent in the Midwest, the Jewetts, along with other African-American families, were subjected to discrimination in many areas of life. But like many of the early African-American migrants to Ann Arbor, George Jewett Sr. possessed a skilled trade. He opened his own blacksmith shop upon settling in the city. In April of 1870, George Henry Jewett Jr. was born. He attended Ann Arbor High School, now Pioneer High School. He excelled in the classroom. He captained the debate team. He was selected as class valedictorian in 1889. Mm-hmm. He spoke German, Italian, and French, in addition to English, proficiencies that would serve him later in life as an entrepreneur. On State Street, between the First Congregational Church and Newberry Hall, most likely in the space that the new William Monroe Trotter Multicultural Center was built. Mm-hmm. Space is sacred and ground is hallowed. Jewett was also a star athlete and captained the track, baseball, and football teams. In track, he earned the distinction of being the fastest sprinter in the Midwest after winning the Amateur Athletic Union's 100-yard dash. After a stellar athletic and high school career, Jewett enrolled in the University of Michigan Literature Department from 1890 to 1893. He was a successful scholar athlete, the son of a well-to-do blacksmith who set an early example of entrepreneurship. Jewett aspired to attend medical school while also playing football for the U of M Wolverines. In 1890, he joined the team. He became not only the first African-American football player, but also the first African-American to play in what would later become the Big Ten Conference. He was almost the first African-American player to play football, but he was preceded in 1899 by Amherst College, William Henry Lewis, and William Tecumseh Sherman Jackson. During the last 2 decades of the 19th century and the first decade of the 20s, a handful of African Americans wore these football uniforms. And although they experienced racial discrimination and social isolation, these early pioneers advanced the cause of racial equality by proving their courage and grit against European American opponents. The 1890 season was successful. Jewett did not play again until the 1891-1892 season. This was not clear whether it was because of racial tensions or because he wanted to focus on his studies. However, he did return. He was a starter and a halfback for every game. It was the first U of M team to win 7 games in a season. Mm-hmm. That same season, Jewett led the Wolverines to an 18-0 victory over the famed Amos Alonzo Stagg-led football team of the University of Chicago. He scored 2 of U of M's 3 touchdowns and set up the third by tossing a lateral to a teammate. Now, football historians credit Stagg with developing the lateral pass, but history tells us Jewett did it in that game. One of his fellow Wolverines, Ralph Stone, complimented Jewett's performance on the field. He said, without the benefit of blockers to clear a path for him, He would dodge, wiggle, twist, pivot, and whirl through the opposing team. Now, the season of 1892 to 1893, Jewett wanted to enroll at the U of M Medical School. Dr. Victor Vaughn did not want him to. Dr. Vaughn, who was informed by his misinformed racial beliefs in the inferiority of people of color, insisted that Jewett could not play football and attend medical school at the same time.
Well, that might be true.
So he decided to transfer, and he went to Northwestern University, where he played football and also got his degree in medical school. So after graduating, he had a short stint as a doctor. He then returned. In Chicago, he worked as a doctor, but then he returned to Ann Arbor. He didn't practice medicine when he came back. He coached. He coached at Michigan Agricultural College, now Michigan State University, Ypsilanti Normal College, now EMU, and Olivet College. And he also worked. He was a janitor at the University of Michigan School of Music.
Wow.
But in 1899, he opened and operated a successful dry cleaning and pressing business called The Valet. It was located at 410 South State Street between the First Congregational Church of Ann Arbor and Newberry Hall. Jewett's business thrived. He delivered clean, pressed clothing to waiting customers from a well-appointed carriage. The Valet was successful because Jewett served an integrated clientele. He took advantage of his own network at U of M and his popularity as a former gridiron great to form a client base that included African Americans, European Americans, and immigrants. Jewett could often be spotted, and we don't have any photographs of this yet, tooling around Ann Arbor, impeccably dressed in a derby hat, spats, and a well-tailored suit, using his fluency in German, French, and Italian to communicate with his customers in their native tongue. He died suddenly at age 38 from heart disease in 1908 while working in his shop. He left behind his wife Lillian and two sons, 6-year-old George H. Jewett III and 8-day-old Richard. Jewett was buried at Forest Hill. Now, Richard, who was 8 days when his dad passed, was the father of Coleman Jewett, well-known and beloved Ann Arbor athlete, educator, and craftsman, and grandfather of Michelle Jewett Trigg and Michael Jewett, the host of the Eastern Michigan University radio station, jazz station. Now, one of the products of the Underground Railroad, one of the programs of the African American Cultural and Historical Museum is the Underground Railroad Tour, Journey to Freedom, and it's a bus tour of Washtenaw County. The Underground Railroad was a term used to describe the secret routes that enslaved Africans and Americans took to gain their freedom. It extended all the way deep to the South, to states and territories where slavery had been prohibited. Those who escaped often obtained help and protection from free Blacks, whites, Native Americans, and other enslaved Black Americans who acted as conductors and provided food and shelter along the way. Two essential routes to Detroit and ultimate safety in Canada crossed in Ann Arbor and Ypsilanti. And traveling along the railroad was not easy. It was a long and perilous journey to reach freedom. One had to travel great distances on foot with little or no food and no protection from those chasing them. Reward posters offered payment for capture. If they were caught, many were beaten, branded, jailed, sold back into slavery, even killed. The census of 1870 listed 231 Black community members. But this number soon grew. At the turn of the century, Ann Arbor was a small city with about 1,400 permanent residents. Of that, half were either foreign-born or had parents who were foreign-born. And overwhelmingly, they came from Germany, and to a lesser extent from Canada, England, and Ireland. Ethnic ties were strong. Churches and schools helped maintain ethnic identities, not only for the European Americans, but also for the 359 members of Ann Arbor's African American community. This photo right here is a picture of our Underground Railroad tour docent, Deborah Meadows. Even in the pandemic, people have still been interested in wanting to take the one-on-one journeys, which we do distanced and sparingly to very specific groups of people who are here for a very short amount of time. Deborah has been doing these tours ever since Willie Edwards passed away in 2014, and she is a tremendous and powerful force in our work. This is another photograph of one of our tours. Carol Mall is one of our tour docents. She's holding the megaphone. This is down on Wall Street, another set of these fierce and fabulous wall panels that the Ann Arbor Historical Foundation, under the direction and love of Ray Detter, has assembled so that wherever you walk in downtown, lower town, parts of campus, you can stand in front of a place, see the history, be in the footsteps, be in the presence. This is the schoolhouse on Traver Road. This is one of our tours. This is a space that was believed to be, it's a hidden space on the floor in the schoolhouse. It's not exactly certain if it was used to hide people, because we do know that Black people did not need to hide in Michigan. But we can't rule it out as a space that people felt like it was a safe place to stay until they were taken to the next location. And this is a group of school kids in front of that tour, in front of that house. And we love this house because the owner is very open and very willing to share with us and let these people come and experience what times would have been like. The schools are tremendous supporters of the Underground Railroad tour. This is another house on the tour at 1317 Pontiac Trail, owned by one of the Beckley brothers. Again, family group, church groups, tours are often requested, and we try to accommodate as many as we can. And this is 1425 Pontiac Trail. It's the Guy Beckley House, one of Ann Arbor's most famous abolitionists, publisher of the Signal of Liberty newspaper, anti-slavery newspaper. They published it in a building that was across the street from what is now the St. Vincent de Paul store. And this was the former owner of the home. They just sold it a couple of years ago. When we do our Underground Railroad tour, she would also often invite people to stop into the yard, where she would read some of the portions of letters that she found when her family bought the house to tell the history of Guy Beckley. Carolyn Quarles is believed to be the first woman of color to escape from, I'm going to say the wrong state, but I do believe it is Indiana, along the Underground Railroad. And her stay at the Guy Beckley House en route to Canada is documented by historians. And this is a picture of the African American Cultural and Historical Museum at 1528 Pontiac Trail. Our goal is to be able to take this beautiful space, which is anchored with a pew from Brown Chapel AME Church. It's over 100 years old, where we hope to tell the story of the African American community in Washtenaw County up at 1528 Pontiac Trail. Now, one of the things that I really wanted to say and to share with you all today is this particular picture is of Catherine Crawford. And Catherine Crawford, so much of our history is men, but we actually have as many stories for women. It's just that we don't often get to combine them in the same presentation. But Catherine Crawford was born and educated in Ann Arbor. She graduated from the University of Michigan Medical School in 1898. She hung out her shingle in her home at 116 Fuller in Ann Arbor. Now, Fuller Street at the time might have been High Street, it might have been Glen Street. It had several different names over the years. But this following is a quote from a survey that she completed after graduating from U of M. She said, "Most striking, decidedly unexpected, yet never to be forgotten was the genuine friendship manifested by so many of my class as well as other college women. But sadly, not all of Catherine's experiences were at this level of acceptance. She expressed her realistic philosophy concerning those aspects that were also painful. Some experiences were exceedingly bitter, immeasurably so, even as I view them after more than a quarter of a century. But they taught me my capacity for endurance." Now, Catherine was also from the same era of Dr. Simeon L. Carson, who also grew up in Ann Arbor. He was known for being one of the first surgeons within Washington, D.C. to use spinal anesthesia during surgery. He was also renowned for his skillful use of general anesthesia throughout his medical career. And at the time, he held the world's record for the operation of cesarean section, the fastest. He performed this delicate operation in 14 minutes. Mothers and babies survived and all thrived. Now, his parents were part of the newly emancipated group of African Americans who were provided few financial or educational opportunities where they were from. But they came north. And they decided to come to Ann Arbor, a large group that came to from North Carolina to Ann Arbor. When Carson was 5 years old, his father, at the prompt of an uncle, came to Ann Arbor, where he became a gardener for the University of Michigan and lived at 13 Maiden Lane. Dr. Carson was truly a product of Ann Arbor. He received his education from Ann Arbor High School. In 1899, he applied and was accepted into Michigan Medical College. He was only 17 years old. 4 years later, he graduated at the top of his class. And according to an article in the newspaper, he was considered the pride of Ann Arbor's small Black community. He was the first Black from that city to graduate from the University of Michigan with an MD from the medical school. His neighbors were so proud, they presented him with a furnished office at 945 Maiden Lane. But he got a job and he left. And he went to Washington, D.C., where he worked at Freedman's Hospital. He was only 26 at the time, and he remained there for the next 10 years. But then in 1919, which you see on the left side, he opened up the Carson Private Hospital in Washington, D.C., one of the first of its kind to be fully operated and directed by a person of color. He became very well known for his swift and effective use of anesthesia. He charged a standard fee, which included a 2-week hospitalization stay at his facility afterwards. He wanted to make sure that his patients were well on their way to recovery before they went home. He served as clinical professor of surgery at Howard University. And after he closed his hospital, he continued to assist in surgeries and teach. So we have found, as I just want to bring us right back to the beginning of your beautiful church. And I'd like to share in my closing a feeling that I have, and I want to be sure I express about how much First Congregation and your embracing of some people that I love very much really does mean to me as well and to our community. Ada Hill's story is one story. The support that your church has given for the Our Own Thing instructional program, Dr. Willis Patterson, Dean of All Things Amazing, and his Our Own Thing Chorale is a very sacred and important tradition to not only to me, but to our community. The Our Own Thing instructional program has provided opportunity for students and people of color to learn how to sing, to play an instrument, to love and appreciate and understand classical music, art songs, spirituals, love songs, sacred songs. It has given us all a place to feel at peace and harmony with the beautiful music that God has blessed us to send and receive. Dr. Patterson, Dean, has shared his gift of music and history and love with every area and resident of this community. It has been not only a wonderful 30 plus years for you all to have had him as musical director, but to have the baton be passed to Darnell Ishmael, who is also the director of the Our Own Thing Chorale, an amazing musical institution in his own right, selfless and completely giving in his love of music and opening up that world so that all of us can participate. I was raised by a father who loved classical music as much as he loved the music of our roots. I came to Ann Arbor and instinctively went to see Handel's Messiah. I had no choice. I knew all the music to it before I came to Ann Arbor because it was a rite of passage in my house. It was played from Advent until Easter, I believe. So I am hoping that today I was able to give you some pieces and glimpses of our history, our common root, our common journey, and that this was a walk of love and learning for you as much as it was for me.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Bev. That was so just incredibly moving of knowing the spaces around us to become more aware of them. Maybe we can take this time to, if there are any specific questions anyone has, to if they either want to unmute themselves to ask a question or put it in the chat. But I'm interested in you telling us a little bit more about the actual museum. You have been a museum without walls for a number of years. And so is there a specific plan to, after the pandemic, to begin to?
Yes. The African American Museum was established in 1993 by 23 founding members. We have started out as a museum without walls, but within a few years, we began to understand we were more of a museum beyond the walls. I have volunteered with them since 1993. When the opportunity to have a home at 1528 became available, we started working toward that as a partnership with the Mosaic Foundation of R&P Hayden. Peter Hayden has been a tremendous partner in this journey with us. We were prepared to move. The building was available to us after many years of painstakingly beautiful restoration to start moving the items that we had collected into the lower level room for our archival storage. It was in March and pandemic hit. It put a stop on everything. And it was a particularly important pause for us because the pandemic has this extreme impact on two of the categories that history serves: old, aged, almost old, and African American. So it was extremely important for us to be able to open freely and fully when we can. Now, I work at the museum on Main Street. I am the administrator there. So our next exhibit is going to be an amazingly delicious exhibit called Breakfast. It is curated by the director of the International Museum of Dinnerware Design, which is 2 doors down from us on Main Street, Dr. Margaret Carney. It is going to be a combination of, it'll be a physical installation, but it will be virtually visited until safely people can come in, limited numbers, limited capacity. The African American Museum does not have the luxury of opening up that way because we are so mindful of our community's safety and health. We hope it's not much longer than the fall, but we are prepared to wait until it is safe and possible to do so. In the meantime, we're working on that first exhibit and getting things ready for the doors to open and the community to walk in safely and openly. And so I guess I would say that for our part about being beyond the walls, the tours, the programs, the talks, the presentations, take us all outside of the area. And currently we have an exhibit on display at the Pittsfield Township Administration Building in their lobby to celebrate Black History Month.
How do you get to take a tour?
The way to get to tour is on our website, which I realize now I should have that website right on the screen. But it is aachm.org. And there is a tab for Underground Railroad tours. And we will be updating that information probably in just another couple of days with what the plan is for how people can take a tour or even request the type of tour that you saw with Deb Meadows with the mask. But I will say there's something about the camaraderie of a bus tour and a group tour that is unmatched, much like how it feels to be present in your church where you're shoulder to shoulder in a pew with your fellow worshipers and people who are ready to experience the beauty of the moment.
I also am aware you also have a partnership with the library and are collecting histories of people still living, that's like a fascinating project.
That is, we have the Living Oral History Program is one of Ann Arbor's and Washtenaw County's, one of the many oral history programs that people have started. What's unique about this one is we call it Living Oral because we'd like to interview people who are not only of a certain age, but also of a certain age of experience. Mm-hmm. One of our greatest regrets is that we did not get to do an interview with Coleman Jewett. He actually passed away 2 days before the interview was scheduled to take place. But one of the interviews that we did get was with Larry Hunter, who was another Ann Arbor community leader who passed away last year unexpectedly. And each year that passes and one of our seasoned saints leaves this earth, we know that we got an interview that if we had waited another day, we wouldn't have gotten. Wow. So we also encourage people, some people aren't so confident to do the interview. They're afraid that they're going to reach for an unremembered thought or try to connect a disconnected dot. So we encourage family members to be next to them and nearby so that they can prompt, help, and we let everybody know editing, like content, is king. So no matter what you say or what you hadn't said, it doesn't have to come out in the final result. One of our advisory board members is a historian named Matthew Siegfried, who did an amazing project with the Ypsilanti District Library to archive the interviews conducted by A.P. Marshall, who's one of the premier African-American historians in Washtenaw County. Of course, he's no longer with us. And those interviews are along the same line as the living oral history because the people were alive, of course, when they gave it. So to listen to any of them or to listen to anybody's oral interview. I encourage, whether it's one of those at Skyline or one of those of a church or one of those that you've got sitting in a cassette tape that you keep thinking to get to, or if it's one of your own that you're going to start to record. It is the memories that matter. The details, the facts, those will be supplied and denied and argued about for decades to come by those who care. It's the memories and the moments and what they mean to you is the purpose of what we like to capture in the oral history. And so sometimes you'll hear the interchange of a word, colored, Negro, Black, African American. As historians, we wonder, should we change? Should we update? But as people, we know that we can't, because it is important to be reminded that we come from eras. We come from places. There is a cemetery on Sunset Road. I can't remember the name of it. Cemeteries are one of my places of inspiration. As a creator, you've got to write, so you need names, you need ideas. And when you get a name from a cemetery, not too many people can come back and say it's me. there is a bench in this cemetery that I love so much. And every time I'm there, I take a picture of it because there is it's not a scripture, it is a statement. And it says simply this: act justly, love tenderly, and walk humbly with your God. And when I read that, I'm always reminded, it doesn't matter who your God is. What matters is that we walk humbly with him. That keeps us so close to that sacred hallowed ground, that we act justly. Then we don't have regrets about who we wronged. We just have memories of what we righted. And that's all we can do as one person, one individual. But one act forms the ground, that hallowed, sacred ground that supports so many. And when we love tenderly, without compromise, without qualification, without prerequisites, our hearts can really hardly stand all of the rewards and all the joy that that will bring. And that's what I feel like our work in history, our work with community, our work with people does. It reminds us that without one, there would not be the other.
May I just interject something? This is Bob Livingston speaking, and Ms. Willis, I really appreciate your presentation, and I'm a like admirer of those people that you lifted up that are part of our church, so I appreciate that too. Just two quick questions. One is, you may or may not have noticed that we're recording this session today, and I'm wondering if it's okay to put this in some place on our website so others could view this presentation, because your historical presentation is absolutely outstanding. But you might want to copyright that because it is so good. But I've learned things in your presentation today that I had no idea about at all. And I hang around Dr. Patterson and some of those people, and I've heard lots of these stories, but I learned all kinds of new things. And I that would be a wonderful thing to be able to share with other people, if you're okay with that.
Yes, I am.
And well, thank you. And secondly, you know, when it becomes possible for us to actively be able to go to the museum and see these displays and, you know, hear more about the stories, how do we find out about that opening when it occurs?
Well, the opening, we'll be updating with our website and on our Facebook, and also by email. So I'll be happy to send an email to the church.
Okay.
And to be part of that list that finds things out. I'm going to share you a really quick, funny story about Dr. Patterson.
I've got some too, by the way.
I got a lot, but I'm going to share one that he won't mind me repeating.
Oh yeah, yeah.
This summer, not this summer. It's COVID-19 has got everything kind of crazy.
Mhm.
We've done so much Zoom that what seems like a year ago was actually just a few weeks ago. Part of a project with New, the nonprofit enterprise at work, they have a program called Champions for Change. It is a program to help young nonprofit leaders get courage and support and incentive and all kinds of great things to help them do that difficult work. So they had asked me, they have what they call a historical journey, where these participants sort of like do a little bit of what we did today, but with a few more sites to take this historical journey. And my task in this project was to bring together 4 or 5 people to talk about our local history. Well, they wanted me to do it, but I know that when you hear these stories come from out of the mouths of Deborah Meadows, who talked about the tour, Lori Saginaw, who of course with Paul Saginaw and Zingerman's has a deep root in Carytown and that history, Joetta Mile, who was a teacher at Huron High. Her husband, Harry Mile, also worked with the Ann Arbor Public Schools, very well-known Ann Arbor family, 3 beautiful, amazing sons. And Matthew Siegfried, my great historian from Ypsilanti, who can do things like this without blinking an eye or referring to a note. And Willis Patterson. And Willis Patterson was going to be my closer, not because he's got the chops and the history to know how to close a big show, but because I know that he knows how to do that. When Dr. Patterson gave his part, it was so moving. I was waiting on him to break into a song, knowing that they weren't going to get it because I haven't gotten it. But they got the melody of his voice and the beauty of his history. When we went into our breakout session, one of the young students in my group was moved to tears by the story of Dean Patterson. He could not stop talking about how awesome that was and how he could not have known it and how he didn't know. And I had to remind him, well, let's start with the fact that you're 19 years old. Just got here. And I had to let him know that he reminded me that no matter how long we have known these stories or how often we have told them or how many times we hope somebody doesn't ask us that to tell us the same story, to the point where we regret that we can't remember the details. That this is all part of the history that we have to be able to hold on to and share. So I learned so much from that young student who learned so much from the dean. And I just hope that we can always continue to share that kind of knowledge and to continue to share that kind of joy of our histories. And, you know, and that's what we're here to do, much like the work that you guys do at a church. It's a living thing.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Beverly.
Yeah, that was wonderful, Bev.
Great. I'm so glad that we
Yes.
did this today.
Yes, we'll look forward to the opening, but just knowing you're doing so much currently. So thank you for all your work.
Well, all of us are working hard. All of us are busy. And I appreciate you as much as you've expressed your appreciation to me.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So much.
Great.
And
Yes, well, enjoy this sunny day.
I intend to, and I hope you all do the same, and look
Yes.
forward to the days when we can walk in the doors of that beautiful church and give that peace and that hug that passes all understanding. Get right in that mix again.
Yeah,
Great.
Will,
Great.
we're
Have a
about to
great
invite you
day.
up to the pulpit.
Thank
You're a
you.
preacher. Thanks
Great.
again.
Thank you. Mhm.
Thank you.
All right.
Thank you.
Mhm.
Thank you
Bye-bye.
very
Bye.
much.